AlphaOmega London, maker of shoes, creators of waves in the fashion industry, introduces Fashion Vanguards podcast. We aim to open minds, share knowledge, listen to opinions, and start conversations. Our podcast series unravels fashion's many guises and tackles head-on the current issues that matter, getting honest views from the mouths that matter. In this series, we'll be exploring how blockchain can impact the world of fashion by aiding transparency in supply chain, amongst other things. Let's talk about the feasibility of blockchains in fashion on a ground level. How can it be implemented? Say if I wanted to start a new fashion brand and use blockchain, how would I do it? Would that even be possible? And what if, say, I were the head of Intedex, which owns a lot of brands like Zara, Bershka, and many others? What then? And what's the cost involved in implementing blockchain? What's the role of the government and other large organizations in it? In an effort to better understand and make others aware of tech innovations in fashion, we have some panelists with us today. They are
Nazina,
Gurdeep,
Daniel,
Raid,
and myself, Ashwini. So firstly, how can blockchains be implemented by a fashion brand or startup?
So the way I think it'd be possible if you had a fashion brand that was more than willing to try and implement that sort of technology, because I think it first starts with how willing you are to accept the technological age in some sort of capacity. I think there's the old school people that are very happy to do fashion with, a sewing kit and a sewing machine or whatever, and they just don't want to embrace technology. There will always be those people. So if the brand, let's assume the brand is technologically aware, technologically advanced, I think the way that you would go about doing it as a startup is you would make, if you were looking for investment specifically, you could go to an investor and you could say, look, this is the benefit for you. By adding value to the investment, by saying, because there was an article, I don't know if you saw, there was an article in the Financial Times that said that the UN now say that ESG, which is environmental social governance, investments are the best, those sorts of investments are the ones that are doing the best on stock exchange.
Oh, that's interesting. So they actually create more returns and they're more profitable.
And they're more considered to be more they are more ethical as well as they're more sustainable. So
is there a reason why?
Yes, because it's to do with social awareness as well as understanding. People are now wanting the millennial age, coming back to the millennial age, are now wanting to now know where their investment's going and what impact it's having on the person or on the entity that.
So we're now basically able to value or quantify the value of being socially responsible.
Yes,
that's so interesting.
So given that, you could go to a investor and you could say, oh, I read this Financial Times article and the UN says this, that, and the other about ESG investment. What are you doing towards? And this can be the leverage to be able to do that.
Okay.
Because essentially fashion is such a big, diverse industry, and there are people like Gurdeep, Ashwini, and even yourself who are changing the status quo about the way fashion is perceived, right? But for investors, they want to know the money, they want to know the return. Now, this return is actually not fiscal, it's reputational.
Right.
And reputational risk, as you will know in law, is ridiculously high. Like if you have reputational risk, you actually are, against the odds not going to succeed as a company long term. Your tenure is probably going to be maximum 5, 10, maybe 15 years. If you become more ethically and socially responsible as a company, as an investment company, you are more likely to succeed. Now, that's the statistics that say that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where you could do it. That's how a fashion brand could go to an investor and just be really good marketeers. We've talked about it in our intermission. If you're a good marketeer, you're charismatic, you understand how people work and how society works and how you can use that to your advantage, you have all the leverage in the world, because not many people do understand that.
I think I was looking at this question more from a practical perspective, actually, and I thought the great starting point would just be establishing your business need. and identifying whether actually, is it transparency and traceability that you're after when you're looking at blockchains, or is it proving where, obviously the product, showing your product to, your end users, its origins, exactly where the raw materials come from, maybe promoting, the source of the raw materials, maybe the farmer, etc., and, where it's grown. So it's really looking at, those sort of basis of determining what sort of angle or area of blockchains you want for that process to sort of support. So really just trying to get a full understanding of how it's going to fit in with your business model, I guess. They kind of go before what you've just mentioned, which is, the sort of funding stage, and being able to, obviously apply for, funding from investors. I think before then you kind of need to establish, okay, what is it we want to, I guess, market as a brand? What is it that we want to focus on in terms of the products that we're making? And I think also it's just deciding on the level of trust that you want to implore as well. How trustworthy do you want to be? I think those are really, really key. And then I guess pick an appropriate blockchain platform. So whether you're looking at the Ethereum or the Ripple, or because there are quite a few many.
Ethereum uses Ether as its currency, but you can also build your own sort of blockchain solution, if you like, on the Ethereum blockchain. And a lot of people do that. You can create your own one as well, like you hear about ICO's initial coin offering. All they're doing is creating new blockchains for various purposes. So in terms of how implementable this sort of stuff is, it's pretty implementable. And you're quite right. You got to base what you want on your needs, which are maybe transparency or whatever it is that you want. That's really it. And in terms of sort of how much it would cost, then it's really, because the software, there's nothing proprietary you have to worry about, really. You're talking about cost of labor for hiring a blockchain developer, which if you're a large company is, a drop in the ocean. So, it's easier than people think. It's just really a matter of establishing your needs, and also hopefully you're smart enough to know what your blockchain constitution, if you like, needs to look like. How long it's going to take for you to verify the various records, and who can govern it. These sort of questions you've got to make sure you can ask them.
And also how easy it is. Also, how easy it is for like farmers or your supply chain members to use it as well.
I mean, again, that's a software development thing. That's probably outside of the blockchain. That's creating a really nice user interface,
right?
And this is like this. If you hire a software developer, this is what you expect him or her to be able to do. So this is sort of, it's asking how can you build blockchain is the same question really as how can you build a piece of software or an app or a website or whatever. A little bit more advanced than your average website or your average app, but if you've got someone with the right expertise, it's the same old thing.
So it's not going to cost like 10 quid, put it that way.
It won't cost 10. Well, if you don't know if you're not a software developer yourself, then you've got to pay somebody. Right. So and unless kind of linking back into the supply chain thing, you're sort of hiring someone under a sort of a slavery sort of contract. You're not really going to be able to.
But like having
pay them 10 quid.
Having said that, the cost of right now tracking a supply chain is much extortionate.
Higher.
You can't track a supply chain without, like, for example, companies that I've spoken to in the past, they said that they'll need their entire turnover. £1 trillion companies need their entire turnover to be even to look past tier 10.
It's a really good excuse.
It's a good excuse, but it's but like, for example, their sustainability departments are 1/10 of their, let's say, their turnover, right? Which is a massive part, considering like sustainability shouldn't really be on the radar of corporate responsibility. Shouldn't, right? But it is, and even if they had all of the turnover, all of the profit, they still wouldn't be able, and it's because it's so extensive. Like, and I'm talking about tier 10, right? Tier 10 is maybe like
quarter of it.
Yeah, it's like not even, you can't even get your head around how complex supply chains are. So to do blockchain would make the technology actually more worthwhile. Like it would make the cause worthwhile, you know?
Yeah.
It makes sustainability worthwhile in a financial economic sense, you know?
My question really though is, so you're saying it costs their entire turnover. What exactly, where would most of those costs go? Is it a technological issue or is it more an enforcement issue?
It's an enforcement issue.
So then my real question is, with blockchain, to what extent do you get rid of those enforcement costs? Because that farmer might live under duress or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, those issues are still present. So
well, I think it creates this understanding. I think it creates a lot of what we're talking about is to do with the psychological effects of what technology and innovation does. Okay, so like essentially what we're talking about is how technology, especially in the social media age, changes the way we think about things, right? Blockchain is perceived to cryptocurrencies or whatever, perceived to be quick cash fast, right? But essentially what they are is people making money off of other people's misfortunes some of the time, right? So when you transfer that to knowing about blockchain and how it can be used, I think it's how much you think you can get out of it is like, also if you say like, it's also that like kind of the blackmailing sort of thing, where if you say, look, I can see everything you're doing through the system, then that kind of plays on the mind of people who would potentially pay people off, and you know, and you can then create enforcement barriers after that. I think it's just another layer of psychology that you're adding to it. That's what I think anyway.
And you think that delivering this sort of thing over the blockchain has that real psychological benefit?
I think so, because especially if you market it in the way that you explained to us earlier in earlier episodes about how blockchain works. You know, if you market it in that sort of way or in a more complicated way, that it probably actually you'd want to do it in a more complicated way, to throw words out that people have no idea what you're talking about, jargon, all of the stuff that makes it sound like horrendous when it really isn't, you know. And that's probably one of blockchain's problems right now with getting it into, you know, mass media, is that there's quite a lot of jargon around like, you know, ICO, blockchain, cryptocurrency. If you don't know the words, you're just blocked out of the system immediately. You know, you can go on Wikipedia and whatever and look up the definition, but like you're not going to get a deeper understanding of the whole topic. But I think it can be reversed and used to quote unquote blackmail people to, you know, get involved.
Just a quick reminder, you're listening to the Fashion Vanguards AO London podcast. Please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, give us a review, and carry on the protest. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
So what about incorporating blockchains into an existing process or system that a larger company has? Because it seems as though the real barriers to adopting a fully compliant blockchain system is mainly down to size. So if an organization is too big, as you were mentioning, you know, $1 trillion making company can't even incorporate a blockchain system because of the cost, then maybe if there is an option to adopt it or adapt it to their existing systems, I presume that's doable.
So they don't know if they have the money to implement a blockchain technology. They know that they don't have the money to implement a standard server-based technology where it's a centralized system. Yes, companies think that they can do blockchain technology, and we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. It wouldn't be hype if people didn't think that they could do that, right? But what the problem is that where it can be implemented, that is the question. If you could, it's almost like that's the £1 million question. If you can work out where it could be implemented. So where I think it could be implemented will be different to everyone else. But where I think it can be implemented is not just in tracking supply chain.
Right.
But you can also then track within supply chain, you can track people who aren't involved in the supply chain but have influence on it.
Right.
So actors like investors, right, where they make their investments from. and you can make something ethical and you can make something sustainable by not actually like using blockchain in the way that they think you can use blockchain.
Right.
So if you look at ethical investment, right, where did they invest money? If you have an investor that has stocks and shares in gold or in copper or in some minerals, right, that's known to be unethical,
and
right?
diamond
Or all of those sorts of minerals and commodities. If you have, then you can use blockchain in order to like figure out how much of like the investment is being done unethically and unsustainably, and you can use that in your supply chain to figure out, like, so it's kind of like a reverse effect. I think you can use blockchain in like nuanced ways instead of using it like, because I think supply chain's fine, but like Rahid said, you get someone who doesn't know who's not educated on how to input the data,
under duress,
or
the incorrect data.
or human error. Let's give them a benefit of the doubt if they're in quote unquote developed countries, right? The human error, not educated, in more sketchy countries under duress. So I think it's so difficult to say pinpoint where it can be used, that like people just can only speculate and hope something sticks. If I throw paint at a wall, right, I know it's going to stick, right? It's like throwing some unnamed and unspecified substance at a wall, not knowing if it's going to stick.
Well, you're depicting the sort of the process of innovation. It's experimentation. That's essential to any innovation.
But I think that the two that I've already talked about, grievance calls and supply chain, are going to be the ones that kickstart other ones.
Yeah.
So although I've already mentioned them, I think those are the two that are going to make headway. Supply chain is a big one. Companies are very much interested in seeing that they can look at their whole supply chain on an iPad, right? And they don't have to spend money going abroad. They don't have to spend money doing this. They don't have to spend money doing that. They'll save a whole bunch of money just by putting it on blockchain.
So when you explain it as using it as a nuance almost, rather than just the simple application of supply chain, how much time do you think that will take for it to really a lot? Because I don't
think it would stick.
No,
that's why I said that, like, kind of almost backtracked on what I said, because like I don't think right now, because I know about kind of how blockchain works, become more educated through Rahid and like everything, but like I don't know how it would stick, because I'm not in the technology, in the business of knowing that.
Right.
My business is speculating and commentating on what could happen without having any industry knowledge about where the industry's going, where blockchain's going. And Rahid works in the university as part of a blockchain institute, research institute, right? So he'll probably know much better than me about where the industry's going, right?
Well, I mean, it's really a case of when you don't know how to do something, you outsource it. So companies like this will just outsource to companies. So for example, I personally am really interested in title registration. ChromeAway, working with the Swedish Land Registry. Swedish Land Registry has no idea how to go about implementing blockchain in the context of title registration, but ChromeAway does. And so because of that, maybe one day in the future there will be a solution, and it will be developed by that third party, by ChromeAway. Here as well, I don't know specific examples, you'll know better, but there will be third parties who work with big fashion brands, and that's the only way it will be implemented.
Provenance and Martin Jalgaard is a great example. Provenance is a blockchain company. Martin Jalgaard is a fashion.
Exactly. And also, I mean, if you're running a business and you decide to incorporate a business activity in-house, then you're taking a risk, because you're hiring people, you're opening up a new part of your office. It's expensive doing stuff by yourself, especially when you have no idea what you're doing. So for companies, it makes a lot of sense, especially in this early stage, to outsource these efforts. I've no doubt that if those companies that outsource these efforts produce something that's really successful, that these large brands won't buy them. It'll just happen. It happens in Silicon Valley. A company does something on top of the big company's activity, and they just buy them out because they do a good job.
And they call it R&D.
They call it R&D. There you go. There you go. So I think, I, as you say, it's already happening with provenance, you're saying. So, that's
and if you said there's also companies right now that are specializing in blockchain in fashion, that's very specific, which makes that niche, even better.
You know?
So.
I've no doubt that the CEOs of those startups that are getting involved in blockchain in the fashion context have, a few years down the line, got their eye on being acquired by a large fashion brand, because that is probably the ultimate payoff. Because chances are they probably won't get to an IPO level. Maybe I'm being cynical, but I don't think they would. They just want to be bought out, especially if, say, the fashion brand wants to get a competitive edge. So I don't know, ASOS or whatever says, we're the ethical brand. We have the blockchain solution. Buy them out, get the rights, get the IP, intellectual property. Boom, that'll look really good. So I think that's probably where it will be headed.
So coming on to the final, the next question, which is, will the industry require government funding or intervention or support in some way to help businesses get into the whole sort of blockchain system?
I mean, integrated really with their business.
Is that a good idea? Do you think the industry needs that? Do we actually need?
I honestly feel like there should be some sort of organization created for the fashion industry to help startups and businesses in implementing blockchain, because I think if there's something separate that primarily focuses on blockchain and fashion industry and tries to link sustainability, they can put in more focus into that and more efforts into delivering that for the brands.
Should it be government backed? Should that be a sort of government
some sort of
body, or
it's a very political question.
Or do you think it should be private? Should it be a privately, sort of created or funded?
I mean, it's
business?
probably better for it to be government than for it to be private, but it depends.
It stops monopoly though.
Yeah, exactly.
By having government involved, it does stop
but at
the
same
threat
time,
of monopoly.
Yeah, it depends on what country you're looking at as well.
Yeah.
The only thing I wonder is, I sort of defer to the fashion people here, there is no government fashion brand. And so the great, right.
And I don't think it'd be particularly good either.
Police uniform.
I would be a bit, I guess police do.
It'd be like tweed and
exactly.
your House of Lords.
But that's the thing. It's a wonderful thing. The beauty of the fashion industry is there are so many designers out there producing so many wonderful designs, and they're independent and they do stuff differently. So I sort of wonder if when you, and I'm going to sound like, this is going to sound like a political viewpoint, but maybe I'm just putting it out there, but if you let people, if you live and let live to an extent in this regard, I'm not saying don't regulate, but if you let people implement as they wish, and maybe in terms of funding, yes, create grants or loans through the government to a limited extent, then I don't see a big issue. I don't think it's necessarily the business of government, aside from regulation, to get involved with this sort of thing.
True.
They can take some part in it, but I feel like someone who has the resources to set up like an organization like that they can.
There's been funding not for blockchain, but for machine learning and AI. There's recently been announced by the British government. They're dedicated over the next 5 years or by 2020 or something like that to release a certain figure in the millions, I think the tens of millions. They also recently did that for the hundreds of millions for energy innovation.
Right.
So, and that has been tendered out to companies specifically, that are using that sort of technology. Like, for example, in the energy industry, you've got batteries, like we spoke about Elon Musk, the battery industry, finding out how to make the most amount of energy out of a small cell, bringing that back to the fashion industry. If someone had a brilliant idea, right, in the fashion industry, or if someone had a brilliant idea of how to use blockchain and sustainability, there would be, the reason why these grants happen is because there's demand from people. And because governments are run off people, like machine learning and AI grant would not have come up 5 years ago.
No.
It's here today because there's a impotence from bodies that have leverage over the market.
Yeah.
And the government care about the market.
Absolutely.
To some extent, the government care about the people, but
Sort
I
of.
think we're
We're
all
further on down the chain,
we're all
the
past
food
the fact
chain.
that like we're important to the government, right? They care about the market and how they're perceived on the market, and if they can influence the market using blockchain, sustainability, fashion, then they'll make a fund for that. So it's just kind of like, when is it going to happen, not if.
Yeah. Don't you? Sorry, very very quickly, Ray. Don't you think that's just following off of the back of what China have done as well? Because Chinese government recently I don't know if they announced themselves, but it was reported that they'd spent a hell of a lot of money investing in similar areas, innovation, tech, AI. I think there's a real push for a lot of governments around the political landscape to try and maybe use these as very compelling cases towards making them as a country more competitive and more powerful.
I would argue though that it wasn't a reaction to China.
Right.
The British government, it was a reaction to the US.
Oh, right.
Because the US and Silicon Valley were becoming so powerful that innovation in machine learning and AI for British-based companies was the reason in response to the advancement of American. You might be able to tell me otherwise, but I think that was probably, I don't think it was ever reported. It was speculation, and I think China came after.
Right.
So, but China have more leverage and more money. In terms of real GDP, China have more money than the UK. But where they're actually putting that, and if Chinese. Because, we also have to remember that Chinese political system is, a capitalistic communist country, which is
state capitalism.
State capitalism. So it's like apples and oranges. It's not. There's no right answer. But
the quick thing I want to do is just draw a distinction between the grants you were talking about, Daniel, and the grants, other types of grants. So. The grants you're talking about to me sound like research grants. So the government said, or research, or putting out contracts for research activities, tendering out research activities to companies, as opposed to, say, going on startuploans.co.uk or whatever and getting a business grant or getting some sort of loan. I think research grants are quite obviously a good idea for the government, something for the government to get involved with. Silicon Valley, China is copying America, because Silicon Valley was basically started by engineers who had some sort of relationship with the US military, who developed really, really cool stuff. There was lots of grants coming from the US military that went to the likes of MIT, the likes of Caltech. There still is. So government getting involved in promoting research is integral, is so important. I think we do a decent job of it in this country. Obviously, the US and China have a speed. But when it comes to business grants, that's different. If it's integrating it into their business models, what it sounds like to me, it's a bit like things like farming policies, like, well, we've got to create so much grain, and so we'll give you these subsidies just to make sure you create the grain. And then there's all sorts of corruption because maybe it's not desired as much. Same here. There's no case for the government to go out and say, incorporate blockchain into your business, if the business hasn't already said, oh, we're going to do it. It's not the place of the government to go ahead and say, do it, and we'll give you money. And so they just do it to tick the box and get some money.
Yeah, no,
that's
definitely.
Yeah. So it's got to be a research grant. And when it comes to research grants, the more the merrier.
But that can be integrated into the business model.
Absolutely.
But like from the standpoint you're talking about, I think it's important.
They do transform. They do try. The number of extremely intelligent engineers who started off just doing research and then transformed it into a business is huge.
And that's the paradox of requiring government intervention, because blockchain or whatever we're talking about is supposed to be a decentralized system.
There we go.
And that's the reason, I'm guessing that's the reason where the question came up, because, saying that, yes, I need government money to do a decentralized system where you have no control over market forces is like saying, here's the greatest paradox of all time.
Yep.
Give me the fuel to continue this, but I think if you can leverage the government, almost leverage the government through research grants, you can almost get that money that you need without asking for the money that you need, So I think that, like I said, I think it's just going to be a matter of when rather than if, because I'm sure people who started machine learning 5 years ago never would have thought that they would be able to apply for tenders on a research grant basis.
To summarize, blockchain can be implemented by fashion brands by following several steps. The first being to identify their business need. Costs could be offset through government funding or support for research purposes. Working with a third party, for instance, one that focuses on developing blockchain specifically for fashion, can make it considerably more feasible.